It wasn't until I pulled into our driveway 3 hours earlier than usual that I felt it. The gut instinct, sharp and unrelenting, that something was wrong. The sky was still bright with late afternoon light, soft gold spilling through the upstairs windows. I had never come home at 4 p.m. before, never unannounced. But traffic had cleared early from the conference, and something in me, some twisted curiosity or silent dread, had whispered, "Go home." As I stepped out of the car, I caught a shadow flicker behind the curtain of our bedroom window. Then a pause. A hand, Kristen's, wiped at her lips with the back of her wrist. Not with urgency, but that lazy post-satisfaction haze. She turned, bent slightly, and tucked something under the edge of the side table. When she reappeared by the kitchen, she carried a half-full glass of red wine in one hand. Two glasses sat on the counter for less than a second before she gathered them. But I saw. One had lipstick. The other didn't. I watched through the crack in the door as she rinsed them both too fast, too nervously, then set only one back into the cupboard. I didn't say anything. I didn't ask why she looked startled when I stepped in, or why she stammered, "You're early," like it was an accusation. I let her lean in and kiss my cheek with wine still on her breath. I let her talk about her meeting tomorrow. I nodded when she mentioned it'd be a late one. I said I'd take care of dinner. I even smiled. That night, I lay in bed beside her, eyes wide open in the dark. She slept turned away from me, her hair pulled into a bun she used to reserve for interviews. I stared at the ceiling and counted each breath until I reached 300. Then I got up and opened her side table drawer. Nothing. Not even a receipt. 3 days later, I told her my mother had a surprise layover in town. "She's only here for tonight," I said casually over breakfast. "Thought maybe you'd stay in." Kristen barely looked up from her phone. "I can't. Big meeting, quarterly projections. It's been on my calendar forever." So I followed her. I didn't trail behind or sneak around. I parked across the street from her office and waited. She never left the building. After 2 hours, I drove home. Her car was gone. On a hunch, I turned east, toward the old warehouse district. There's a private gallery there, the kind you need an appointment to enter. I'd passed it before, but never been inside. Her car sat across the street, too obvious, too clean for that area. Through the gallery window, the light was soft, dim, almost romantic. I stepped out and crossed over. I didn't enter, just stood beside a van parked out of sight and watched through the glass. Kristen stood near a tall man in a gray blazer. They weren't touching, not quite, but their foreheads were tilted in, hers slightly lower. Her eyes were closed. His hand hovered near her back. Their silhouettes said more than any kiss would have. I drove away with both hands clenched on the wheel and the windows down, even though it was too cold for that. The next morning, I visited her father under the pretense of a business opportunity. We co-managed an investment portfolio for a boutique startup. Kristen and I founded 2 years ago. I told him I needed to reroute some funds for a side venture, a clean energy app. Something Kristen and I had casually discussed once, long enough ago for it to feel plausible. He gave me partial access. I spent the next 3 nights cross-referencing our business accounts. Kristen had made 6 wire transfers in the past 6 months to a consulting firm I'd never heard of. I dug deeper. The firm was a shell. The account belonged to the man in the gray blazer. His name was Elliot Crane. Elliot Crane. A week later, I attended a tech conference in Denver where he was scheduled to speak. I wore a Navy suit I hadn't pulled out since Kristen's cousin's wedding and approached him after his panel. Told him I was an investor looking for people with vision. He lit up. We chatted for 20 minutes about platform design, venture capital, projections. "Do you have a family?" I asked casually. "Getting married next spring," he said without hesitation. "Oh," I said, hiding the static in my chest. "What's her name?" "Kristen. Kristen Lyon. My wife." He smiled when he said her name, like it was something he wanted to bite into. I excused myself, stepped out into the cold air, and didn't breathe until my lungs ached. 2 days later, Kristen received a letter from a law firm she thought she recognized. We had used them once for a contract dispute. The envelope bore the same logo. Inside was a full lawsuit: fraud, misappropriation of business funds, evidence of personal transactions, every transfer, every name, even the gallery's address. Stapled to the back were photographs, The car, the window, her hand on Elliot's chest, and a cover letter marked for review prior to deposition. She never called, never texted. She just left. The following morning, I signed a contract transferring ownership of our house to my sister under a legitimate sales agreement. Then I filed for emergency divorce citing marital fraud and financial deceit. The court date was rushed through on a Friday. Kristen didn't show. That night, I took our leftover wedding catering, the frozen remains of an expensive celebration, and hauled it to the rooftop of a shelter 2 blocks from our old apartment. I passed out grilled salmon and wild rice to homeless veterans and single mothers. One kid asked if it was someone's birthday. No, I said, just leftovers. When I woke the next morning, I checked the joint account, soon to be closed. Only one thing had been posted to the feed: a photo of our wedding ring, alone on wet concrete, lit by early sun. Captioned, "Returning it. Doesn't fit." And for the first time since coming home early, I felt nothing at all. A week passed. I didn't change my routine. I still got up at 6:15, still jogged the loop around the lake before the neighborhood stirred. I still brewed coffee the way Kristen liked it: 2 scoops Colombian dark roast, 1 cinnamon stick cracked into the filter. Then I poured 1 mug. Just 1. Her mug stayed upside down in the cupboard. But even in silence, the house spoke. The lipstick ghosted on the rim of a water glass beneath the sink. A perfume bottle under the bed I didn't recognize. Earthy, peppery, not like her usual florals. And then there were the gifts. Kristen had always been a thoughtful gift giver. She never forgot a birthday or anniversary. Even the date I got promoted to partner at the firm, she made sure to send a custom leather briefcase to the office with my initials embossed. So I began looking back, not for the sake of nostalgia. I went through every drawer, every closet, and pulled out each present she'd given me in the past year. A watch, a pair of Bluetooth earbuds, a cufflink set. None of them matched our account charges. I dug deeper. Eventually, I found the truth inside an innocuous spreadsheet, one I used to track our household expenses. It was something I'd built years ago, but Kristen had added her own column over time. I filtered it by date and cross-referenced each gift with our joint statements. That's when it hit me. 3 items marked with vague labels like lifestyle vendor and third-party purchase had been bought on a card I never had access to. It wasn't the business card. It wasn't the family card. This was something else. I drove to the stores listed on the receipts. Most turned me away. One didn't. The clerk, an older woman with a thick braid and square glasses, looked up when I asked if she remembered a tall brunette who bought a limited edition speaker last spring. "Oh yes," she said brightly. "She came in with her fiancé. I remember because they couldn't decide between the 2 colors." I didn't correct her, just nodded, then asked, "Did he pay for it?" The woman thought for a second, then smiled. "Yes, she picked it out, but he paid." My skin prickled. I thanked her, stepped outside, and stood under the awning as rain started to fall in light. Precise drops, like the world was reluctant to weep. Back in my car, I wrote down a name: Elliot Crane. I underlined it twice. Then I turned the page and wrote, "She replaced our memories." That same day, I drove to our old apartment building. Not to reminisce, I needed answers. One of our former neighbors, Mrs. Halbrook, still lived on the 2nd floor. She was retired, chatty, the kind of woman who watched everything without making it obvious. She opened the door with surprise, but invited me in after I mentioned Kristen. "You know," she said, pouring tea that tasted like boiled bark, "I always thought it was strange how often she came back here." "What do you mean?" I asked. "Oh, she said you had moved, but sometimes she and a man would have dinner on the balcony. This was last year. I assumed you were separated." I kept my face steady, thanked her for the tea, and left without drinking it. I didn't go home. Instead, I drove to the restaurant where Kristen and I had celebrated our first anniversary. A quiet place, upscale but not ostentatious. We'd made a tradition of it, always sitting at the same table near the window, always ordering the same bottle of wine. And she was there. Same table, same wine, different man. She leaned in close to him, her hand on his wrist. The gesture was so familiar, I nearly mistook it for a flashback. But then she laughed, touched her neck in that specific way she did when flirting, and it became clear. I set my phone on the edge of the bar, pressed record, and waited. It didn't take long. "I'll play the wife a bit longer," she said, sipping the wine he paid for, "just until the dust settles." It took everything in me not to walk over and slam the table into splinters. Instead, I left. I had what I needed. 3 days later, I invited her parents to dinner, reserved a private room, made sure Kristen was conveniently held up at work. After the first course, I slid my phone onto the table and pressed play. They listened. They didn't speak. Kristen's mother stared at her wine like it might contain an explanation. Her father clenched his jaw so tight I thought he might break his own teeth. When the recording ended, I handed them a package. Inside were every wedding card we had ever received, all signed with hopeful notes. "For eternal love. To forever. Unbreakable bond." Each card now had a red stamp across the bottom. Void. That same night, I left an album in Kristen's car. Photos of us from every year of our marriage. Each one neatly crossed with a black marker. Each caption erased and replaced with a date and one word. Erased. Then I sent our business partners a formal notice. Included with the lawsuit attachments were details of misallocated funds, proof of double accounting, and a note. She destroyed the home she lived in, funded by lies. A few hours later, I drafted a document for Elliot. Either issue a formal statement of non-interference with our assets, or I release a set of falsified income reports that imply financial misconduct on his part. I never heard back, but the silence was enough. Through court, I froze her share of our jointly owned apartment. Then I moved all her belongings into the hallway and labeled every box with the word untouched. The next morning, I welded the front door shut, not locked, welded, and taped a simple sign in the stairwell. Vacant. Former occupant evicted. By noon, the neighbors were talking. By dusk, Kristen's voice echoed in the stairwell as she stood in disbelief, reading the sign with shaking hands. I didn't answer the door when she knocked. I just listened, not to what she said, but to the silence that followed. I didn't hear from her for a week. Not a call, not a knock, not even a text. The silence was surgical, too clean, too absolute. That's how I knew she was planning something. On the 8th morning, I was brushing my teeth when I heard her voice on speakerphone. It wasn't directed at me. She had forgotten her Bluetooth was connected to the kitchen speaker from the night before, something she used when cooking. She must have stepped out into the backyard for better reception. The call echoed through the house like a confession. "Soon we'll be free, I promise," a man's voice said. It was calm, intimate, like a pact. Kristen's reply chilled me more than his words. "I'm trying. Just keep everything quiet until I finalize things." Then a pause. "If he finds out..." I turned the water off. She ended the call as I stepped into the kitchen. She glanced at the speaker, eyes wide for a fraction of a second before composing herself. "That was my brother," she said too quickly. "He's dealing with a situation." I nodded and said nothing. That afternoon, I told her I needed some time alone. I packed a bag, left my phone on silent, and drove north until the roads turned to gravel. There's a stretch of woods 3 hours from the city where reception dies and thoughts become louder than traffic. I needed the noise of my own mind to figure out what was real. In a small cabin I used to rent during college, I sat in the dark and made a list. Not of emotions, not of dreams, just facts. Trips. 8 overnights in 5 months. Sick days. 3 used after conferences. Missing jewelry. Her grandmother's locket vanished in March. Forgotten bags. Left behind in places she never returned to retrieve them from. New passwords. On every device. Unlocked truth. Only when she slipped. It wasn't the betrayals that hurt most. It was the planning, the efficiency, the surgical precision with which she stepped around me while playing house. I returned 3 days later. The moment I walked in, I knew she had searched the place. The drawer in my desk where I kept an old watch sat slightly ajar. The blinds in the upstairs hallway had been drawn, something I never did. She was looking for a clue, or maybe evidence I'd found hers, so I gave her one. I arranged a game night with our friends, old college roommates, a few neighbors, people who knew us when we were stupid enough to think forever was a promise and not a gamble. About halfway through the evening, I switched on a movie during a break in the game. Nothing subtle. A film about marital betrayal, affairs, secrets. The kind of plot that wraps around your throat if you're guilty. Kristen lasted 16 minutes. Then she stood abruptly and left the room, claiming a migraine. Everyone else stayed seated, eyes flicking toward me, unsure. One of them, Brent, waited until the movie ended, then pulled me aside. We hadn't talked in weeks. "We knew," he said quietly. "We didn't want to get involved." My stomach didn't drop. My chest didn't tighten. There was no shock left in me. Only confirmation, cold and final like a verdict. The next morning, I sent out handwritten invitations to a family breakfast. Not just her parents. Everyone who ever sat at our wedding table. Her cousins, my sister, aunts, uncles, the godparents of our now defunct future children. I even invited her ex-boss, the one who mentored her before Elliot replaced everything. I rented out the old park where we took our second anniversary photos, where she wore a white dress not for a wedding, but because she liked how it danced in the wind. A projector stood against the brick wall. I let them talk, sip coffee, nibble at croissants. Then, without a word, I pressed play. The slideshow was titled 2 Years of Lies. Each slide was time-stamped. Each photo cross-referenced with a transfer, a meeting, a lie. Kristen arrived halfway through. She didn't speak, just stood near the fountain where we once posed laughing and watched as her own timeline rewrote itself in front of everyone. When the last slide faded to black, she turned and walked away. No one followed. Back home, I found the journal she always kept hidden under the bed. She must have forgotten it when she stormed out after game night. I read every page. It was worse than I thought. Descriptive, deliberate, names, places, times, thoughts comparing him to me, memories I thought were ours overwritten. And somewhere in the margins, the word alive circled 3 times, like she believed what she had with him was her first real breath. I didn't burn it. I didn't tear it apart. I ripped each page perfectly in half, then rebound the journal in black tape and labeled it Truth. I mailed it to her. No note, no return address. Just truth, sliced clean. The next day, I filed an emotional damages suit through court. Not for money, for record. I attached scans of the journal excerpts, her handwriting, her confessions. The clerk blinked at me as I handed her the file. "You sure you want to go public with this?" I didn't answer, just walked away. 3 days later, I received a contact request. Kristen wanted to meet. I didn't hesitate, filed for a restraining order instead. 2 months passed. Fall settled in, and the air began to lose its warmth. The leaves fell with quiet violence, the kind that doesn't scream but still tears things down. One morning, I stood outside the courthouse with my nephew. He was 6, orphaned 2 weeks earlier, my sister's son. I had been named guardian in the will. I'd fought for that. I wanted something good to fight for again. He held my hand tightly as we walked through the doors of his new school. On the registration form, under the section marked Family, I wrote, Me, and the one who hasn't betrayed me yet. I didn't tell anyone when I left. No letter. No dramatic farewell. I just loaded a truck with what I needed. 3 chairs, a workbench, 2 crates of books I couldn't part with, and drove south until the skyline disappeared behind wind and dust. I settled in Texas near a town where everyone wears denim unironically, and nobody asks about your past unless you give them permission. A single-story house with sun-warped siding and a chain-link fence. The kind of place that doesn't ask for more than you're willing to give. I took a job at a sawmill, the kind of work that leaves you too tired to think and just awake enough to feel your bones still working. There was no bed frame, just a mattress on the floor. A dog I named Rook kept watch at the door. He never barked, just stared, like he could still hear the life I left behind. I started fixing things. Old tables, broken dressers, chairs with missing limbs. I'd sand the surfaces down until the scars were visible, never polished away. I sold them at the local market on weekends. People started asking for commissions. Word spread. I didn't talk much, just handed over the finished pieces with a nod. 4 months passed. Then the letter came. It wasn't handwritten. Kristen never liked handwriting. It was printed, neat and professional, with her name typed in the corner like a label she no longer deserved. She asked to collect her things. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I packed 4 boxes. The first held empty frames. All the photos removed, just glass and hollow outlines of where memories once sat. The second had shredded documents, contracts, letters, the brochure from the honeymoon hotel where we'd once argued about whether to go snorkeling or just stay in bed. The third contained her wedding dress, still in its original box, now lined with black cloth. The fourth held a brick, one she'd painted in art school. It had a quote on it once. I scraped it clean. No return address. No note. I sent it all. A week later, my mailbox held a card, thin and cream-colored, like a leftover from a birthday she forgot to send. Inside it read, I still love you. I lit the grill, burned it to ash, then mixed the ash into a fresh batch of concrete I used to lay the foundation for my new workshop behind the house. The next day was our wedding anniversary. I didn't drink, didn't cry. I just posted a photo on my work profile, a chisel blade. Caption, knives don't cut when timing's sharper. It didn't go viral, didn't even get many likes. But that wasn't the point. A year passed. The furniture sales grew into something more. I held a private exhibition in a refurbished barn just outside town. I called it 14 Knives, 14 Pieces. Each one designed after a specific lie I'd trace back to her. The tilt of a table leg, the sharp corner of a shelf, the hidden groove behind a cabinet, symbols only I understood. A local radio host invited me for an interview, asked about the title. I forgave, I said into the mic, but took away her voice. The segment went quiet for a few seconds longer than necessary. Then we moved on to finishes and joinery. After that, my project took on a different shape. A local therapist invited me to speak to a group of men, divorced, discarded, destroyed in ways that didn't make headlines. I told them I wasn't a speaker. She said, that's why they'll listen. It wasn't therapy, it was reckoning. Soon we started a social initiative, a support line, a small retreat program. We called it Sawdust Brothers. The logo was carved into each piece I made now. Not loud, just a notch in the wood, burned in deep. Then one day another letter came. I almost didn't open it. This one wasn't from Kristen. It was from her lawyer. No threats, no negotiations, just an apology. Typed again. But something about it felt real. I folded it into a paper vase and placed it in the center of my workshop's table for the upcoming auction. A man bought it. He was a veteran, probably in his late 60s. Had that hollow in his eyes you only get when you've seen too many things die. He placed the vase on the counter and said, we've all burned something. I looked at him and nodded. For the first time in a long while, I laughed and said nothing. That's all for now, folks. Thank you for being with me today and listened. And if you liked my story, please subscribe, hit the like button, and comment below what you think about all this and what would you do if you were me. Also, don't forget to check my other stories in description below.